this is not the perfect closing point, but I'm going to read it. This is my latest book. There are a few copies back there if you like this. This came out 2 years ago, I think, something like that. This one is a poem from when my wife and I were getting together, and she was pregnant, and so this one is an homage, I guess, or a respect paid to Sylvia Plath. It's titled "More Metaphors." I'm a riddle in 9 syllables, if you remember her poem about being pregnant. So this is my take on that. You're an oven baking the sweetest breads, a bank account with high interest, a fat book with a gripping climax, a water balloon hurtling through the still autumn air toward the sleeping father. Oh, you dear double-wide mobile home, you halt traffic on these narrow roads. Your boxed fruit shipped to a cold climate. I'm waiting at the station for you. Are there any questions?
Is there an established path to fame in poetry?
I think there are paths. I don't know the established path. I mean, certainly, I think nowadays, writing in college, taking creative writing courses, going to get an MFA, getting accepted to Swanee or Breadloaf or something like that, having a few famous poets pat you on the back, let you skip the 10,000, 20,000 entries into the Chicago Review because you're their bud. And none of that is wrong. I'll sound cynical about it, but it's an apprentice method, right? I mean, it's just a permutation of that old way of studying under the Druid priest, right? And learning the trees. And so, but that seems to me to be a way that many people in America are doing it today. I think it was obviously different. Another way is to write really good poetry and die. And then someone else will proclaim you, Emily Dickinson's method, right? There's Walt Whitman's method, which is to kind of promote yourself, which was maybe Ginsberg's method. I don't know enough about Ginsberg really. But, so that would be my half cynical, half sincere answer.
Your libretto project seems very interesting, like it would produce a lot of work. It reminds me of something I heard in college about making things new again as a poet. Could you talk a little bit about that approach to writing poetry and how making it new has worked for you in the projects that you've done?
That's really a good question given our discussion because, because if I'm remembering correctly, the Make It New was Ezra Pound. Mm-hmm. And he was really breaking the tradition at that moment. We live in I think we live in a kind of a different moment because there are this postmodern world that we live in, almost anything goes, right? So it can be formal and it can be chance poetry. It can be any number of things, anything from Tom Waits to Ashbery to what have you. So so if you're really trying to make it new, in that groundbreaking way that Pound was talking about, I don't know how to do that because to me it looks like everything's been done. But what I try to do with the libretto thing is I remember poets like Joe. I mean, Joe probably doesn't know this, but his voice and his influence, among other poets in Austin and elsewhere, and what they say about poetry, kind of hover off my shoulder. And what it is, it's, one is being true to yourself, and one is trying to find really the right language. Because I think if you find really the right language, it probably is new, right? And so that, to me, is the struggle. And like I was revising some poems from that group because I've been unhappy with them. They seem a little too 19th century, some of them. They seem a little bit too close to the libretto. And then a few of the poems I was writing started to break away, and high school stuff started coming in, and guys revving engines, and so maybe it's Joe, I don't know, but it's, Faust is out there, another Faust opera, but is out there revving his engine, I don't call him Faust, but the poem becomes this thing. Now, in one sense, that's not new, because people have been writing revving engine poems, since before the Beach Boys, and so, but for me, it's kind of new. And, that's kind of as good as I can get. Is that, I haven't written about revving engines. And so, and again, like I took the news items, in that other poem. I mean, there was the woman in Houston who killed her kids, that was a news story that rattled around in my head for 5 years.
You've got a poem about the woman that left her baby in the park.
Yeah. Yes, I've been affected by mean mothers. I guess. Leave that to Freud. So I didn't really answer your question. It's just, it's just, I just kind of have to keep saying, have I heard it before? And sometimes I forgive myself and just let it be. It's the William Stafford line, you just kind of, at a certain point, you just give up and accept. Because he was writing every day, and people ask him, what do you do when the poem's not any good? And it's like, well, I lower my standards. I think that's good advice. Lower your standards sometimes. But mostly don't, mostly don't. But otherwise you go crazy, I think. Any other?
You sure? And now I ask a question. No question. Okay.
Earlier you were saying that you started writing poetry 12, 13, somewhere in there, and
it was a dirty song lyric.
right.
Ah.
And then poetry was saying things that you thought, saying things that you wanted to be said,
Yeah.
saying things that were important to you to have been said,
Yeah.
being in conversation with them in that way. How much of your career as a poet has been trying to do that on the other side of the page? You've produced a book, several books, and how much, if any, what's your awareness of your audience and trying to affect them the way you were affected when you were younger?
I claim that I'm very sincere in my attempt to entertain an audience. And I really do think it's our role, one of our roles, to do that. It doesn't have to be ha-ha entertaining. It can be frightening, or it can be shocking. It can be what it is. But so I tell myself that I'm really trying to think of the audience, and trying to do things. Obviously, I'm entertaining myself too, and I can accept that. But if I came to a poetry reading and people didn't listen, and they walked away, the one that I was reading, I would be sincerely troubled by it, hurt by it, but an internal hurt and troubled by it because, and but so yeah, so I also think, I'm a teacher, right, and so I can't shake the pedagogical side to the role of poet, that we, so I'm 61 years old and still trying to do it. And part of the reason I'm still trying to do it is I don't want you to give up. Because if all we have are the highly successful Robert Bly's or Billy Collins, and there's no one and everybody else at 35 quit writing, that what would you do? What would the young do? And there'd be no obvious path forward. So is that selfish egotism? Maybe. Is it altruistic generosity? Maybe. But I fantasize that there's a role there as keep going, chump. You can do it. So that, I don't know if that answered it.
No, it's a beautiful place to stop.
Okay.
Is there? All right. Well, I'd like to thank Malvern for hosting this event. And Lyman, you get your free Malvern.
Oh,
And on the back of the shirt, it commemorates that this used to be Pleasureland, and now it is a different kind of adult bookstore. So thank you very much for hosting, Mr. Bratcher, Lyman Grant. We'll be back.